The autumn of 1941. Moscow faced mortal danger. German tank columns, having breached Soviet defenses, swiftly advanced toward the capital. After the catastrophic defeats near Vyazma and Bryansk, when hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were encircled, the road to Moscow seemed open. At this critical moment, the Soviet command decided to create the last line of defense, the Mozhaisk Defense Line. This was not merely a military object, but a true shield, designed to halt the enemy's onslaught on the approaches to the heart of the country. The line stretched from Volokolamsk through Mozhaisk to Maloyaroslavets and Kaluga, forming a semicircle west of Moscow. Under conditions of catastrophic shortages of time, resources, and personnel, a system of fortifications capable of delaying the powerful German army had to be created. The strategic importance of the Mozhaisk Line is hard to overestimate. It was the last frontier before the capital, whose fall would open a direct path to the Kremlin for the enemy. These positions were to buy precious time for bringing up reserves and organizing a counterattack. The fate, not only of Moscow, but of the entire country now depended on the strength of this hastily created defensive shield. The decision to create the Mozhaisk defensive line was not spontaneous. Already in the summer of 1941, when German troops were rapidly advancing deep into Soviet territory, the Supreme Military Command recognized the necessity of preparing defensive lines on the distant approaches to Moscow. Initially, it was planned to hold the enemy on the Vyazma-Bryansk line, where significant forces were concentrated. However, reality proved harsher than forecasts. By early October, the situation on the front had sharply deteriorated. The German command launched Operation Typhoon, aimed at capturing the Soviet capital. Powerful enemy tank groupings broke through the Soviet troops' defenses, and 5 armies found themselves encircled. The road to Moscow was practically open. Under these critical conditions, on October 13th, the State Defense Committee made an urgent decision to construct a new defensive line along the Volokolamsk, Mozhaisk, Maloyaroslavets, Kaluga frontier. This was a forced measure, dictated by the catastrophic development of events. The Mozhaisk line became the last defensive frontier before the capital. Only a matter of days were allotted for its creation, as German motorized units were rapidly advancing. The Soviet command understood that the loss of Moscow could have not only military, but also colossal political consequences. The capital was the most important transportation hub, industrial center, and symbol of statehood. Its fall could lead to the disorganization of the country's governance and undermine the morale of the army and the people. It was precisely for this reason that the creation of the Mozhaisk defensive line became a task of paramount importance. To solve it, all available resources were mobilized. In conditions of a shortage of regular troops, engineering preparation of the terrain acquired special significance. It was necessary to create a system of fortifications capable of compensating for the enemy's numerical superiority and its advantage in armored vehicles. The peculiarity of the situation was that the line had to be created literally in front of the advancing enemy. In many cases, the construction of fortifications was carried out within range of enemy artillery. Workers and engineers toiled under bombings and shellings. It was a race against time, the price of which was measured by the fate of the entire country. The choice of the Mozhaisk defense line was not accidental. The geographical features of the terrain between Volokolamsk, Mozhaisk, Maloyaroslavets, and Kaluga offered unique advantages for organizing an effective defense. This stretch of land, extending in a semicircle 100 to 120 kilometers west of Moscow, represented a natural shield for the capital, reinforced by natural obstacles. The Volokolamsk direction formed the northern flank of the defense line. Here, the terrain was characterized by hilly relief with numerous rivers, including the Lama and its tributaries. Ravines, small forests, and marshy areas created natural impediments to the advance of German armored vehicles. Soviet engineers skillfully utilized these features, integrating natural obstacles into the defense system. Volokolamsk, situated on high ground, provided good visibility of the surrounding area, which was critically important for organizing artillery fire. The central section of the line passed through Mozhaisk, an ancient city with a rich military history. It was no coincidence that it was here, in 1812, that the Russian army fought Napoleon's troops. Mozhaisk is located on the Smolensk upland, which created favorable conditions for defense. The Moscow River and its tributaries formed additional water barriers. The hilly terrain, with elevation changes of up to 100 meters, allowed for the creation of a multi-tiered firing system and hampered enemy maneuvering. The southern flank of the line passed through Muscovites and Kaluga. Here, the defense line relied on the Protva, Oka rivers, and their numerous tributaries. The dense forests of the Kaluga region limited the possibilities for large-scale use of tanks and forced the enemy to operate along roads, which simplified the organization of anti-tank defense. Muscovites, located on the high bank of the Luzha River, served as a natural fortress. An important geographical advantage of the chosen line was the presence of a developed road network connecting all key defense points. This ensured the possibility of rapid transfer of reserves and supplies to threatened sectors. At the same time, many secondary roads passed through forests and swamps, which complicated enemy flanking maneuvers. The autumn mud, which turned dirt roads into impassable routes, became an unexpected ally for the defenders. German equipment bogged down in the softened ground, which significantly reduced the pace of the offensive and forced the enemy to operate along the main highways, where the Soviet command had concentrated its main defensive structures. When choosing the defense line, the possibilities for creating floods were also taken into account. Dams on small rivers allowed for the creation of artificial water barriers, especially effective with the onset of cold weather, when the water turned into ice fields, impassable for vehicles. The construction of the Mozhaisk Defensive Line was a true feat of the people, one of the largest mobilization campaigns of wartime. When the enemy stood at the gates of the capital, hundreds of thousands of its residents rose to defend Moscow. On October 12, 1941, the State Defense Committee issued a decree on the construction of defensive structures. The very next day, tens of thousands of Muscovites began work. According to eyewitnesses, people moved in an endless stream. Columns stretched for many kilometers. These were predominantly women, teenagers, and elderly men, those who had not gone to the front. Factory and plant workers, office employees, housewives, students, and high school students. All of them became soldiers of the labor front. More than 500,000 people worked daily on the construction of fortifications. This number is astounding. The population of an entire city rose to defend the capital with shovels and pickaxes in hand. Work was carried out around the clock, in 3 shifts, despite the autumn mud, cold, and constant enemy air raids. Often, construction took place within range of enemy artillery fire. People lived in hastily dug dugouts or in peasant huts in surrounding villages, often 20 to 30 people in one room. Food was scarce. There was a lack of warm clothing and footwear. But no one complained. Everyone understood that the fate of the capital depended on their labor. It was especially difficult for women, who made up to 75% of all those mobilized. Fragile city women, who had never before held a shovel, spent 12 to 14 hours a day digging frozen ground, hauling logs, and laying anti-tank obstacles. Many of them were mothers who had left small children at home. Teenagers, aged 14 to 16, worked alongside adults. They showed amazing endurance and enthusiasm, often exceeding norms. For many of them, this was the first serious test in life, a kind of baptism of fire. Elderly people, many of whom still remembered the First World War, shared their experience and encouraged the youth. Their wisdom and resilience became a moral support for all participants in the construction. In a matter of weeks, these people created hundreds of kilometers of anti-tank ditches, up to 3 meters deep and up to 8 meters wide. Thousands of pillboxes and bunkers were built, tens of thousands of anti-tank obstacles were installed, and hundreds of kilometers of trenches and communication passages were dug. The volume of earthwork completed amounted to millions of cubic meters. Under normal conditions, such construction would have taken months or even years. But under the mortal danger hanging over the capital, this colossal work was completed in an incredibly short time. The Mozhaisk Defensive Line became not just a system of military fortifications. It became a symbol of the unity of the army and the people, a symbol of an unyielding will to victory. Anti-tank obstacles became a key element of the Mozhaisk Defensive Line. Given the superiority of German tank formations, it was necessary to create a system of barriers capable of slowing down the advance of enemy armored vehicles and directing them into the fire of anti-tank artillery and small arms. The core of this system consisted of anti-tank ditches, gigantic earthworks up to 3 meters deep and up to 8 meters wide with steep, almost vertical walls. Their total length on the Mozhaisk line exceeded 130 kilometers. The ditches were located considering the terrain features. In open areas where tanks could operate, blocking roads and possible bypass routes. They were especially densely created on tank-dangerous directions: Volokolamsk, Mozhaisk, and Maloyaroslavets highways. The earth removed during the creation of the ditches was used to build escarps, steep cuts of hill slopes up to 5 meters high. These artificial cliffs prevented tanks from overcoming elevations. On the opposite side of ravines and gullies, counter-escarps were created, steep slopes opposite to escarps, further hindering vehicle maneuvering. A crucial element of anti-tank defense was forest roadblocks. On forest roads and clearings, trees were undercut at a height of about 1 meter from the ground and felled with their tops towards the enemy, forming impassable barriers up to 2 meters high. Roadblocks proved particularly effective in combination with mining. To combat tanks, metal anti-tank hedgehogs were widely used. Simple but effective structures made of 3 steel beams welded crosswise. They were manufactured at Moscow factories and installed in groups on probable tank routes, especially at road intersections and in populated areas. In October 1941 alone, more than 37,000 such hedgehogs were installed on the Mozhaisk line. Minefields were created on the approaches to key defensive strongpoints. Despite a severe shortage of anti-tank mines, they were concentrated in the most likely directions of tank attacks. Mines were installed in a checkerboard pattern, with a density of up to 1,000 pieces per kilometer of front. Explosive charges made from aerial bombs and artillery shells, placed on roadsides and remotely controlled, became an effective means of combating tanks. Water obstacles were also included in the system of anti-tank barriers. Dams were created on small rivers, allowing the flooding of low-lying areas. With the onset of cold weather, the ice on rivers and ponds was detonated, creating open water, or intentionally thinned by supplying warm water. All this created deadly traps for enemy equipment. The system of anti-tank barriers of the Mozhaisk Defensive Line played a decisive role in slowing down the German offensive. Enemy tanks were forced to operate along predictable routes, where they fell under the fire of anti-tank artillery. Overcoming the barriers required time and special equipment, which the Germans often lacked. The engineering ingenuity and heroic labor of the creators of anti-tank obstacles made an invaluable contribution to the defense of Moscow, becoming one of the factors that thwarted the German blitzkrieg. Long-term firing points became the backbone of the Mozhaisk Defense Line. Unlike field fortifications, pillboxes, DOTs, were reinforced concrete structures capable of withstanding direct hits from medium-caliber artillery shells. More than 250 such fortifications of various types were built along the line from Volokolamsk to Kaluga. The core consisted of single embrasure machine gun pillboxes with wall and ceiling thicknesses ranging from 60 to 120 centimeters. They were armed with Maxim heavy machine guns, providing an effective firing range of up to 1,000 meters. 2 and 3 embrasure pillboxes, allowing for all-around defense and engaging the enemy with crossfire, were placed in key directions. Artillery pillboxes, armed with 45mm anti-tank guns, were of particular value. Their armor-piercing shells could penetrate the frontal armor of German tanks at distances of up to 500 meters. The placement of pillboxes was based on the principle of fire interaction. Each point covered its neighbors with its fire, creating a continuous zone of engagement. They were especially densely located in tank-vulnerable areas, along highways and in open terrain. The distance between neighboring pillboxes usually did not exceed 300 to 400 meters, which ensured effective coverage of firing sectors. The internal equipment of the pillboxes included places for the crew, ammunition, filter ventilation units, and communication devices. The autonomy of the structures allowed the garrison to fight under conditions of complete encirclement for several days. Many pillboxes had underground communication passages, connecting them to nearby trenches and command posts. This ensured the hidden movement of personnel, the delivery of ammunition, and the evacuation of the wounded. The heroic defense of individual long-term points became a symbol of the resilience of Moscow's defenders. Especially well known is the feat of the garrison of the pillbox near the village of Akulovo in the Mozhaisk direction. The machine gun crew under the command of Lieutenant Alexei Kremenchugsky repelled attacks by superior enemy forces for 3 days. When ammunition ran out, the defenders blew up the structure along with the Germans who had surrounded it. In the Volokolamsk direction, the crew of an artillery pillbox commanded by Junior Lieutenant Pavel Goods became famous. In the Battle of October 17th, his crew knocked out 7 German tanks, preventing the enemy from breaking through in an important sector. Even when a shell destroyed the embrasure, the artillerymen continued to fire, repairing the damage under fire. The system of pillboxes on the Mozhaisk line not only slowed the advance of German troops, but also inflicted significant losses on them. Each such reinforced concrete fort became a center of defense, around which positions for rifle units and field artillery were organized. Even after the main line of defense was breached, many pillboxes continued to fight while encircled, diverting significant enemy forces and disorganizing their rear communications. Field fortifications formed the basis of the echeloned defense of the Mozhaisk line, complementing the system of permanent firing points. Unlike reinforced concrete pillboxes, they were built from readily available materials: earth, wood, stone, and could be quickly erected even with limited resources. The central element of the field defense was full-profile rifle trenches, up to 2 meters deep and about 60 centimeters wide at the bottom. They were equipped with a parapet up to 120 centimeters high, firing positions, and niches for ammunition. A characteristic feature of the Mozhaisk line trenches was their broken tracing, a zigzag shape that protected against enfilade fire and reduced losses from mortar shelling. To protect against bad weather and shell fragments, the trenches were covered with a log overlay and a layer of earth. The rifle trenches were connected by communication trenches up to 1.5 meters deep, providing concealed movement for soldiers. The total length of trenches and communication trenches on the Mozhaisk line exceeded 800 kilometers, the distance from Moscow to Minsk. For accommodating personnel and protecting against artillery fire, dugouts were built, structures sunken into the ground with an overlay of several layers of logs and a layer of earth up to 1 meter thick. A typical dugout could accommodate a squad of soldiers and protect it against fragments and small-caliber shells. The dugouts were equipped with simple burzhuika stoves, allowing for heating in cold weather. For long-term accommodation of personnel, bunkers were created. more spacious and comfortable structures, dug into the ground by 2 to 2.5 meters. Their walls were reinforced with wooden shields or wattle, and the overlay consisted of 3 to 4 layers of logs, covered with a layer of earth. Inside, 2-tiered bunks, a stove, and a table were installed. Command bunkers were additionally equipped with communication facilities and workstations for staff officers. Special attention was paid to the creation of observation posts, providing a circular view of the terrain. They were located on elevated positions and equipped with periscopes, allowing observation without danger. From the observation posts, artillery fire was controlled, and the actions of units were coordinated. To combat tanks, anti-tank areas were created within the system of field fortifications, including trenches for anti-tank rifles, camouflaged positions for guns, and shelters for crews. Anti-tank rifles were placed in groups of 2 or 3, providing the ability to hit the side armor of tanks from different directions. Trap trenches, camouflaged pits with sharpened stakes at the bottom, became an effective means of combating enemy infantry. They were arranged on probable routes of infantry movement, especially in wooded areas. For firing in the dark, illumination points with flare guns and searchlights were equipped. Their proper placement allowed for illuminating the neutral zone during enemy night attacks without unmasking their own positions. The system of field fortifications of the Mozhaisk line of defense became an example of the most effective use of terrain and available materials. Despite the lack of time and resources, it provided the necessary stability of defense and allowed for wearing down the attacking enemy in heavy battles on the approaches to Moscow. The artillery system of the Mozhaisk Defensive Line became a true fiery shield of the capital, the last frontier capable of stopping the Wehrmacht's tank wedges. The core of the anti-tank defense consisted of 45mm anti-tank guns of the 1937 model. These guns, dubbed Sorokopyatkas by soldiers, when used skillfully, were capable of hitting German tanks at a range of up to 500 meters. Along the Mozhaisk line, they were placed in groups of 3 to 5 guns, creating anti-tank strongholds. A distinctive feature of their placement was their echelonment in depth. A second line of guns was located 300 to 400 meters behind the first. This allowed the fight to continue even after the enemy broke through the front line of defense. The crews of the Sorokopyatkas meticulously prepared their positions. The guns were placed in trenches with ramps for rolling out, had zapasny positions, and carefully camouflaged shelters for the crews. For combating heavy tanks, 76mm regimental and divisional guns were used, capable of hitting German Panzer IVs at a range of up to 800 meters. They were installed in concealed positions, carefully camouflaged, and several alternate firing lines were prepared. Howitzer artillery of 122mm and 152mm caliber was positioned in the depth of the defense and used to create barrage fire along the enemy's infantry advance routes. A distinctive feature of the Mozhaisk line's artillery system was the creation of anti-tank areas, sections of terrain up to 3 kilometers deep, saturated with anti-tank assets. Anti-tank guns, anti-tank rifles, landmines, and minefields were concentrated here. Such areas were created in tank-hazardous directions. Along the Volokolamsk, Mozhaisk, and Maloyaroslavets highways, a crucial element of the artillery defense was the zones of concentrated fire, pre-sighted areas of terrain where, upon the enemy's appearance, massive fire from all types of artillery would open up. Such zones were created in front of the forward edge of the defense, on the flanks, and in depth, especially along probable bypass routes around strongholds. For combating tanks, armor-piercing incendiary bullets were widely used, capable of igniting fuel tanks and disabling observation devices. Machine gun crews received 1 to 2 boxes of such cartridges for use at critical moments of battle. A new element of anti-tank defense was the Degtyarev and Simonov anti-tank rifles. capable of penetrating the armor of light and medium tanks at a range of up to 150 meters. Their crews were positioned in groups of 2 to 3 rifles to conduct crossfire on the sides and rear of tanks. For combating enemy infantry along the Mozhaisk line, 50mm and 82mm mortars were actively used. Their high mobility allowed for quick changes of position, avoiding retaliatory fire. Mortar batteries were located on the reverse slopes of elevations, which provided them with protection from direct enemy fire. The artillery system of the Mozhaisk Defensive Line was characterized by its flexibility and maneuverability. For each gun, 3 to 4 alternate positions were prepared with laid maneuver paths. This allowed for the rapid relocation of firepower to threatened directions and avoidance of losses from enemy artillery counterstrikes. Fire control was carried out from observation posts, equipped on commanding heights. They were connected to firing positions by telephone lines, duplicated by signal means. For night battles, light beacons were prepared, and systems for illuminating the terrain with flares were created. The tactics for defending the fortified areas of the Mozhaisk line were based on the principle of echeloned defense in depth. Each fortified area was not just a line of trenches, but a complex system of strongpoints arranged in 2 or 3 echelons. The forward edge of the defense consisted of platoon and company strongpoints, equipped for all-around defense. Behind them, at a distance of 1 to 2 kilometers, were battalion defense sectors, and in depth, regimental and divisional reserves. Such a structure allowed resistance to continue even after the enemy broke through the forward edge. Particular attention was paid to organizing flanking fire. Machine gun positions were placed in such a way as to create zones of crossfire in front of the forward edge of the defense. This allowed attacking enemy infantry to be destroyed even before reaching the positions. For combating tanks, anti-tank strongpoints were created, saturated with anti-tank guns, anti-tank rifles, and groups of tank destroyers armed with grenades and Molotov cocktails. A key element of the tactics was the maneuver of fire and forces. Commanders at all levels pre-planned the concentration of fire on the most probable directions of enemy attacks. For this purpose, mobile fire groups were created, squads of machine gunners and mortar crews capable of quickly moving to threatened sectors. Reserves were located in the depth of the defense, in places that ensured covert deployment to any part of the front. Routes of advancement and deployment lines were prepared for them in advance. An innovative element of the tactics was the creation of mobile barrier detachments. These groups of sappers with a supply of mines and explosives could quickly mine enemy breakthrough directions, creating additional obstacles in their path. Counterattacks were planned as an integral element of the defense. They were carried out by small forces, a platoon, a company, immediately after the enemy's penetration into the defense. The purpose of such counterattacks was not to fully restore the situation, but to slow down the enemy's advance and gain time to prepare a counterstrike with larger forces. The most important principle of defending fortified areas was its activity. Even in the most tense moments of battle, Soviet troops conducted reconnaissance sorties, raids on enemy positions, and set up ambushes. This kept German units under constant tension and made it difficult to prepare attacks. The command and control system was built on the principle of centralized leadership and decentralized execution. Commanders of fortified areas determined the general defensive plan, but strongpoint commanders had significant freedom in choosing specific courses of action. This increased the stability of the defense in conditions of communication disruption. Engineering equipment of positions was constantly improved even during combat operations. In breaks between attacks, soldiers deepened trenches, equipped additional firing positions, and laid new communication trenches. The tactics of defending the fortified areas of the Mozhaisk line demonstrated a high level of military art of the Soviet command. In conditions of numerical superiority of the enemy, especially in tanks and aviation, it was possible to create a defense system that not only slowed down the advance of the Wehrmacht, but also inflicted significant losses on it. The experience gained in defending the Mozhaisk line was subsequently used in the creation of other defensive lines and became an important contribution to the development of military art. The Volokolamsk fortified area became a true northern shield for Moscow, one of the key elements of the Mozhaisk Defense Line. Located 110 kilometers from the capital, it covered the shortest route to the city, the Volokolamsk Highway. The terrain here was a hilly plain intersected by small rivers Lama, Ruza, and their tributaries. Such terrain offered certain advantages to the defenders, but required thorough engineering preparation. The Volokolamsk fortified area was based on 3 defensive lines, echeloned in depth for 15 to 20 kilometers. The front line ran along the eastern bank of the Lama River, using it as an anti-tank obstacle. Here, dozens of reinforced concrete pillboxes with machine gun armament, artillery positions, and a developed system of full-profile trenches were created. Special attention was paid to anti-tank defense. On tank-dangerous directions, anti-tank ditches up to 3 meters deep were dug. Minefields and anti-tank hedgehogs were installed. Artillery positions were placed to provide flanking fire on advancing enemy tanks. The defense of the fortified area was held by the legendary 316th Rifle Division, under the command of Major General Ivan Vasilyevich Panfilov. This division, formed in Alma-Ata and Frunze, consisted mainly of Kazakhs and Kyrgyz, residents of Central Asian republics, many of whom had never seen snow. However, these people showed exceptional courage and resilience in the battles on the approaches to Moscow. General Panfilov, an experienced military leader with extensive combat experience, masterfully organized the defense. Understanding that his division was stretched over a front of 41 kilometers, with a norm of 8 to 10 kilometers, he created a system of strongpoints covering the main roads and tank-dangerous directions. The gaps between the strongpoints were covered by crossfire and protected by mobile barrier detachments. The engineering equipment of the Panfilovites' positions was distinguished by its thoughtfulness and thoroughness. Each battalion defense area included a system of full-profile trenches connected by communication passages, dugouts, and shelters for personnel, positions for guns and mortars. Special attention was paid to camouflage. Many firing points were so skillfully disguised that they were only discovered by the enemy after opening fire. On October 16, 1941, German troops launched an offensive in the Volokolamsk direction. Against Panfilov's division acted units of the 5th and 11th Panzer Divisions of the Wehrmacht, elite formations with rich combat experience. Despite the enemy's multiple superiority in manpower and equipment, the Panfilovites put up stubborn resistance. The most famous episode of the defense of the Volokolamsk fortified area was the feat of 28 soldiers from the 4th Company of the 2nd Battalion of the 1075th Rifle Regiment, under the command of political instructor Vasily Klochkov. On November 16th, near Dubosekovo siding, a small group of soldiers engaged in an unequal battle with 50 German tanks. Political instructor Klochkov uttered the legendary words, "Russia is vast, but there is nowhere to retreat. Moscow is behind us." During the 4-hour battle, the Panfilovites knocked out 18 enemy tanks and died, but did not retreat. The engineering preparation of the position at Dubosekovo played a decisive role in this battle. The trenches were dug full profile, with niches for ammunition and shelters from shrapnel. An anti-tank ditch was dug in front of the position, forcing German tanks to seek a detour and move along predictable routes. This allowed the soldiers to effectively use anti-tank grenades and Molotov cocktails. The Mozhaisk fortified area became the central node of the entire defensive line, covering the shortest path to Moscow along the Minsk Highway. It was here that the Soviet command concentrated its most powerful engineering structures and significant forces. The terrain favored the defenders. A hilly landscape with elevation changes of up to 100 meters, numerous rivers and streams. Groves and ravines created natural obstacles for the advance of enemy armored vehicles. The engineering outfitting of the positions was distinguished by particular meticulousness. The main feature of the Mozhaisk fortified area was a deeply echeloned defense system, including 3 main lines. The forward edge ran along the eastern bank of the Moscow River, where powerful resistance nodes with reinforced concrete pillboxes and a developed trench system were created. The second line was located 5 to 7 kilometers to the east and included a system of strongholds on dominant heights. The third line directly covered the approaches to the city of Mozhaisk. Anti-tank defense was built on the principle of canalizing the movement of enemy tanks. On open sections, anti-tank ditches up to 3 meters deep were created, and their approaches were covered by crossfire from anti-tank artillery. Special attention was paid to mining roads and tank-accessible areas. The density of minefields reached 1,000 mines per kilometer of front, an unprecedented figure for that period of the war. The fire system was organized taking into account the peculiarities of the terrain. Machine gun points were placed on the flanks of strongholds, ensuring crossfire on the approaches. Artillery positions were equipped on the reverse slopes of heights, which protected them from direct enemy fire. For each gun, 2 or 3 spare positions were prepared with laid maneuver paths. The defense of the Mozhaisk fortified area was held by the 32nd Rifle Division of Colonel Viktor Ivanovich Polosukin, reinforced by artillery units and tank subdivisions. The division was well equipped and had combat experience, which significantly increased the stability of the defense. The fortified area received its baptism of fire on October 12th, when advanced units of the German 4th Panzer Group reached the forward edge of the Soviet defense. The first attacks were repulsed with heavy losses for the enemy. Anti-tank strongholds, where artillery, anti-tank rifles, and tank destroyer groups were concentrated, proved particularly effective. During the battles of October 13th and 14th, the Germans lost more than 40 tanks, but could not break through the defense. The heroism of the defenders of the Mozhaisk fortified area was manifested in numerous episodes of battles. Lieutenant Ivan Chesnikov's artillery battery, occupying positions near the village of Yelnya, repelled 7 tank attacks in one day, knocking out 11 enemy vehicles. When the shells ran out, the artillerymen let the tanks get close and then pelted them with grenades. Sergeant Pyotr Novikov's anti-tank rifle crew, surrounded by German infantry, continued to fire until the last round, destroying 2 tanks and several dozen infantrymen. The skillful use of engineering structures and terrain allowed the defenders of the Mozhaisk fortified area to hold back superior enemy forces for 6 days. Only on October 18th, having exhausted all possibilities for resistance, did Soviet troops withdraw to the next line of defense. But even the retreat was conducted in an organized manner, preserving military equipment and heavy weapons. The Mozhaisk fortified area played a key role in disrupting the German offensive on Moscow, forcing the enemy to lose the tempo of the offensive and suffer significant losses in manpower and equipment. The Maloyaroslavets and Kaluga fortified areas represented the southern flank of the Mozhaisk defensive line, covering the approaches to Moscow from the southwest. The geographical features of this sector differed significantly from the central and northern sections. Hilly terrain, intersected by numerous rivers, including the Protva, Luzha, and their tributaries, created natural lines for organizing defense. Dense mixed forests restricted the maneuver of enemy armored vehicles and forced German units to operate primarily along roads. The engineering equipment of the southern flank had its own peculiarities. Unlike the central sectors, where the main emphasis was on anti-tank obstacles, here, significant attention was paid to creating forest blockages and mining roads. In the Maloyaroslavets direction, over 30 kilometers of forest blockages up to 2.5 meters high were created. Trees were sawn but not completely felled, creating a booby trap effect, When attempting to clear such a blockage, it would collapse on the sappers at work. Positions for rifle units were equipped, taking into account the forested terrain. Instead of continuous lines of trenches, autonomous strongpoints with all-round defense were created, capable of operating under encirclement conditions. Each such point had a supply of ammunition and provisions for 3 to 4 days, which ensured the stability of the defense even when the enemy penetrated deep into the Soviet troop dispositions. Special attention was paid to camouflage. In forested areas, firing points were located under tree crowns, which made their detection from the air difficult. False positions with mock-ups of guns and equipment, diverting enemy fire, were widely used. The defense of the Maloyaroslavets fortified area was held by the 43rd Army of Major General Konstantin Dmitrievich Golubev. Its positions were attacked by units of the German 57th Motorized Corps on October 18, 1941. Despite the enemy's numerical superiority, Soviet troops offered stubborn resistance. A key role in the defense was played by pre-prepared firing positions on dominant heights. Artillery batteries, located on reverse slopes, delivered flanking fire on advancing German columns, inflicting significant losses on them. An innovative tactical technique was the use of mobile barrier detachments. These small groups of sappers with a supply of mines quickly mined enemy breakthrough directions, creating additional obstacles. In combination with the actions of mobile fire groups, this allowed effectively delaying the advance of enemy units, even with limited defending forces. The Kaluga fortified area, forming the extreme southern flank of the Mozhaisk line, had its own specifics. Here, flat terrain with isolated forest masses prevailed, which required different approaches to organizing defense. The basis of the anti-tank system consisted of escarpments, steep cuts of riverbanks and ravines up to 4 meters high. These artificial cliffs prevented tanks from overcoming natural obstacles and forced them to move along roads, where they became vulnerable to anti-tank artillery. October-November of 1941 became a time of the most brutal trials for the defenders of the Mozhaisk Defensive Line. It was during these cold autumn days that the fate of the capital was decided, as German tank columns, having broken through the outer perimeters of Soviet defense, rushed towards Moscow. The Mozhaisk line bore the brunt of the Wehrmacht's assault, becoming the last shield before the heart of the country. The first serious battles unfolded in the Volokolamsk direction, where on October 12th, advanced units of the German 5th Panzer Division attacked the positions of General Panfilov's 316th Rifle Division. The enemy threw up to 200 tanks into the offensive, supported by aviation and artillery. However, the meticulously prepared system of anti-tank ditches and minefields played a decisive role. German tanks were forced to seek detours, falling under the flanking fire of camouflaged anti-tank guns. Remarkable effectiveness was demonstrated by wood-earth firing points, which the Germans often mistook for ordinary peasant structures. The crew of such a pillbox, under the command of Sergeant Timofey Lavrentiev, located near the village of Ostashevo, repelled 7 enemy attacks during the day, destroying 3 tanks and up to a platoon of infantry. Even when a German shell destroyed part of the fortification, the fighters continued to fire, restoring the embrasure under shelling. In the Mozhaisk direction, the system of echeloned anti-tank defense played a key role. German tanks, having overcome the first line of obstacles, fell under the fire of the second echelon of anti-tank guns, camouflaged on the reverse slopes of the heights. Artillery ambushes proved particularly effective. Small groups of guns, secretly positioned away from the main positions, opening fire on the flank and rear of breakthrough tank groups. In the battles for Maloyaroslavets, the effectiveness of forest blockages in combination with mining was demonstrated. German sappers, attempting to clear passages, suffered heavy losses from booby traps and sniper fire. The advance of enemy motorized units slowed to 3 to 4 kilometers per day, instead of the planned 30 to 40. An unexpected factor influencing the course of the battles was the autumn mud season. Torrential rains turned dirt roads into impassable swamps. German tanks and vehicles got stuck in the soggy ground, becoming easy prey for Soviet artillerymen and anti-tank gunners. The Soviet command skillfully used this factor, concentrating main forces on directions with hard-surfaced roads. During the defensive battles, the defenders of the Mozhaisk Line constantly improved their anti-tank combat tactics. Tank destroyer groups, squads of soldiers armed with anti-tank grenades and Molotov cocktails, became widespread. They operated from slit trenches, camouflaged behind anti-tank obstacles, attacking tanks halted before ditches and minefields. The success of the defense on the Mozhaisk Line was due to a combination of several key factors acting in concert. First and foremost, the skillful use of terrain and its engineering preparation. Soviet military engineers maximized the use of natural obstacles, rivers, ravines, elevations, integrating them into the defense system. Anti-tank ditches were positioned to complement natural barriers, creating solid, impenetrable obstacles for enemy armored vehicles. The echeloning of the defense in depth became the second decisive factor. Instead of a single line of fortifications, a system of successive lines was created, allowing resistance to continue even after the enemy broke through the front line. Each subsequent line was prepared with consideration for possible breakthrough directions and had pre-prepared firing positions for artillery and machine guns. The interaction of various branches of service was organized at a high level. Rifle units, artillery, engineering units, and a small number of tank groups acted as a single mechanism. Artillery supported the infantry. Engineering units promptly created obstacles in threatened directions, and tanks were used for counterattacks. Anti-tank defense played a special role. The concentration of anti-tank assets in likely directions of tank attacks, the creation of anti-tank strongholds and areas, allowed for effective combat against enemy armored vehicles, even with a limited number of anti-tank guns. The activity of the defense came as a surprise to the German command. Even in the most difficult conditions, Soviet troops conducted counterattacks, set up ambushes, and carried out reconnaissance by force. This forced the enemy to act cautiously, constantly expecting counterblows. The maneuver of forces and means was carried out at a high level. Commanders of all ranks skillfully transferred reserves to threatened directions, concentrated artillery fire at critical points, and created mobile barrier detachments to block breakthroughs. The moral factor cannot be overestimated. The defenders of Moscow understood that there was nowhere further to retreat. The capital was behind them. This gave them additional strength and determination. Mass heroism became the norm of behavior. Soldiers stood to the death, defending every meter of their native land. Skillful leadership of troops by the command also played a decisive role. Commanders of all levels, from army commanders to platoon commanders, showed initiative, resourcefulness, and resilience. They inspired soldiers by personal example, were in the most dangerous areas, and made unconventional decisions. The weather became an unexpected ally of the defenders. Autumn slush turned dirt roads into impassable swamps. German equipment got stuck in the mud, which significantly slowed the pace of the offensive. With the onset of cold weather came new problems. German tanks and vehicles, not adapted to the Russian winter, often broke down due to frozen fuel and oil. An important factor was the interaction between the army and the civilian population. Local residents helped the troops by acting as guides, collecting intelligence, and providing food. Many of them joined extermination battalions and partisan detachments operating in the enemy's rear. The Mozhaisk Defense Line became not just a military frontier. It turned into a symbol of the resilience of the Soviet people, their determination to defend the capital to the last drop of blood. It was here, on the last line before Moscow, that the German blitzkrieg was stopped and then broken. The legacy of the Mozhaisk defensive line extends far beyond the military history of the autumn of 1941. This defensive line became not just a tactical element in the Battle of Moscow, but a symbol of resilience and engineering ingenuity, lessons from which are relevant even today. First and foremost, the experience of creating the Mozhaisk Line proved the effectiveness of echeloned defense, a multi-layered system of fortifications where one line follows another, with strong points located between them, allows for wearing down the enemy even with their numerical superiority. This principle formed the basis of Soviet defensive doctrine and is still used in military planning. The second crucial lesson was the understanding of the role of terrain and its engineering preparation. The Mozhaisk Line showed how the skillful use of natural barriers, rivers, ravines, hills, combined with artificial obstacles, greatly enhances defensive capabilities. Modern military theorists continue to study this experience when planning defensive operations. Of particular value is the experience of anti-tank defense. The system of anti-tank ditches, minefields, and ambush fire created on the Mozhaisk Line allowed for effectively combating enemy armored vehicles even with a limited number of anti-tank weapons. This experience was used in the creation of subsequent defensive lines and was reflected in post-war regulations and manuals. The Mozhaisk Defensive Line became an example of the mobilization of the civilian population for military needs. Hundreds of thousands of Muscovites, mostly women, teenagers, and elderly people, created a powerful defensive system in the shortest possible time. This experience of interaction between the army and civil society in critical situations has enduring significance. No less important was the moral aspect. The Mozhaisk Line became a symbol of the determination to defend the capital to the last possibility. The words of political commissar Klochkov, "Russia is vast, but there is nowhere to retreat. Moscow is behind us," expressed the spirit of the defenders of this line and the entire Soviet people. Today, in the era of high-precision weapons and information technologies, many tactical techniques and engineering solutions of the Mozhaisk Line may seem outdated. However, the fundamental principles, echeloning of defense, use of terrain, combination of various types of obstacles and firepower, retain their relevance. The historical significance of the Mozhaisk Defensive Line goes beyond purely military aspects. This line became a turning point in the Great Patriotic War. It was here that the German blitzkrieg was stopped. Here the myth of the invincibility of the Wehrmacht collapsed. The delay of the German offensive on the Mozhaisk Line gave the Soviet command precious time to bring up reserves and prepare a counteroffensive. The Mozhaisk Defensive Line will forever remain in history as the shield that saved Moscow at the most critical moment of the war. Its creation and heroic defense became an example of how engineering ingenuity, military skill, and the indomitable will of the people can withstand seemingly insurmountable force.